Well, hello, friends, and welcome to another WSIB Truth Matters with Joe Machado, where I separate the truth from bullshit, facts from fiction, in plain English. So I'm back talking about this whole issue of mental health and how the WSIB has to take this issue seriously, which, in my opinion, they haven't been. And so we're going to continue to hammer them on this until they actually take notice and start taking the appropriate action on this critical issue. All right, my friends. So without any further delay, let's get at it. And we're back. Welcome, my friends, and to my friends at the WSIB. Here's my salute to you. This has by far been the most difficult topic that I have covered on this channel and that I have dealt with over the past almost 35 years dealing with this organization. And if anything, I think that it has reached a level of urgency that I haven't seen before. I have, over the past 3 years since starting this channel, I've done about 4 or 5, maybe 6 videos on this topic, and I've been warning the WSIB about the consequences of ignoring injured workers who have mental health issues, who need treatment for those issues. And it's beyond explanation as to why they fail to address this matter in the level or with the level of urgency that it requires. I had initially stated that I was going to dedicate the month of November to this topic, but I've decided to extend it until the end of December because there's more to talk about, and we just can't let up, and I have too much that I need to share. And I've heard the stories, I've received the emails and phone calls, and I've talked to people who are right in the middle of this storm. Some of them, they can't find a way out. And you're probably watching this video and you're going, yeah, that's the situation I'm in. I don't know what else to do with these fuckers. Like, my doctor requests additional treatment. I've asked for additional treatment and they deny it. And I'm not getting better. In fact, with their bullshit tactics, I'm finding myself thinking about these issues more frequently. It's become a constant in my life, right? These are the stories that I hear, and they just don't care, right? They don't. And I have so much to share because I have nothing but disdain for these fuckers. I just don't, right? I want to talk a little bit about the dual role of the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board, right? They have 2 roles. One is as the designated provincial government body under the provincial government, the Ford government, to administer the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act, right? The Workplace Safety and Insurance Act is the law that governs all work-related injuries or occupational diseases. This organization, their function, one of the 2 roles, is to administer that act, right? Legislators write the laws, then certain policies are created by WSIB people as to how they're going to implement those laws in terms of the policies that they've written to provide direction and guidelines to decision makers so that they're making decisions in a manner that's consistent with the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act, with the intent of the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act, which has been written by legislators, right? These are government officials within the NDP or the Liberal or the provincial parties who will present proposed legislation. It goes through the process of reading and then passed into law, providing that it is enacted or agreed to. That's the law, right? And the policies are written by WSIB policymakers, where they look at the law and then they look at how they're going to apply those sections. And then decision makers, case managers, right, are supposed to be taught, given the experience, given the supervision, given all the guidance and support that they require to implement those laws. And the policies are sort of guidelines, but they don't seem to follow them very often. What's the other role of the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board? Well, the other role is the WSIB as an employer. And the WSIB's role as an employer is to then provide the infrastructure in terms of, well, their president, Jeff Lang, who earns between $450,000 and $500,000 a year, if you can fathom that fucking number for one person. And you've seen me talk about the VPs, the 20 plus VPs, the directors, and yada, 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 right? Just go back and watch some of my videos on this topic so you can see just how much fucking money is being wasted with these people. But anyway, that's the infrastructure that they created, and then they bring in, then they have nurse consultants and provide medical guidance, and then they have case managers who actually make decisions regarding the case or the claim. They have the eligibility adjudicators, who are the first ones who will determine whether the case is accepted or the claim is accepted or denied. Then it gets moved on to a case manager to manage the file, and yada, 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 all of these things, right? You're probably familiar with most of them. And if you're new to the channel and this is a little bit new, just go watch some of my other videos, because it talks about all of this stuff, right? So those are the dual roles: as the administrator of the insurance plan, the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act, and then as an employer. As an employer, the WSIB has the same rights, responsibilities, the same rules, guidelines, and procedures and whatnot, and adherence to the Human Rights Code that applies to every employer, which the WSIB seems to think it doesn't apply to them. But anyway, that's their other role. And they always seem to think that because they are the administrators of the plan, that they can't be held responsible for their decisions, whether they're appropriate or not. These are decisions that affect people's lives. There are consequences to those decisions, right? The consequences are that, you know what, they cut you off and they didn't have the legal right to do that. And it was all done by case managers who really don't understand the law or whatever. They bring in their own feelings as to how they think things should be, which should not be considered in any decision-making process. They need to consider and follow the policies that are written and been established. And when those policies aren't clear, they have to defer to the reading, to the actual statement of that section of the law, which is the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act. They don't have the right to make up another policy or create a different interpretation of that policy that is entirely in conflict with the law. And then it's absurd, right? But they do this. They engage in this kind of stuff. So the question then becomes, well, you know, a decision can have some very significant ramifications, right? And those ramifications can be that, I'll give you an example. They cut you off, right? And so you're not earning any income. You're medically supported to not be able to return to work. So you're supported to being off work. And because they're not paying you loss of earnings benefits and you're not having income, maybe you can't pay your mortgage, and if you can't pay your mortgage, then there's foreclosure and you lose your home, right? And so they are the cause of that if it's proven that they were negligent in making decisions in your case that resulted in financial or in damage to you and your family that would have otherwise not occurred, right? That's fucking negligence, right? Because now they're stepping outside of the law and the policies. There's got to be a mechanism to hold them accountable, because if they're just considered to be the ones who have the authority and whatever by the province to administer the law, well, if they're not administering the law in the correct manner, there has to be a form of negligence there, which there is, which these fuckers seem to think they're not accountable to it. But they are. Believe me, they are. It's just, nobody's ever actually taken them to task in a manner that really highlights and opens up their fucking asses to such an extent that you can actually look inside and figure out what the fuck's going on in there, right? Yeah, I know. You get it. I'm disgusted. Of course I'm disgusted. I mean, look at my own experience, right? I had just turned 18, really. I was a fucking punk. I didn't know shit. And I was working for an employer. I'd been in the country 6 months after come over from Portugal. And I was working for this machine shop. And, they didn't really care about the laws. They just cared about making products, these steel milk tanks and all that kind of stuff for farmers and turning a buck. And safety wasn't the thing that was at the forefront of their priorities, right? So me, this punk who doesn't know shit, I'm told, well, listen, you're going to work on this punch press, right? A punch press is a machine that comes down, it's a die, and it punches a hole in steel. You can imagine the amount of pressure involved in that. So I'm working on this punch press, and they said, okay, this is what you do. You get this piece of metal, you have this die, which in that case, it was a rectangular die. You can have them in a round shape or whatever for whatever product you're making. And there's a piece of metal, and I bring the metal and I put it there, and I push at that point it was a foot press, so I click the foot, and this thing comes down, punches the hole, and I move it to the side, right? And then I go over and I grab the next piece and I do it over again, right? It seems pretty simple, which it is. I mean, a fucking monkey could do that job, right? So, and I'm not being disrespectful to those of you who are operating with punch presses these days. I understand your role in the big machine of producing product, and I get that and I respect that. But yes, the job I was doing, a trained monkey could have done the fucking job, right? So I'm doing this, and boom, without any warning, right? Oh. So sometimes it creates a magnet, and the actual die, the product or the piece of steel that should have been knocked and gone down was stuck to the die when they came up. So it was stuck there. So I went to push it off, right? I didn't press the pedal. I'm not a fucking idiot. And boom, that thing without warning comes down, and all of a sudden I see just blood gushing all over the place, right? And I fortunately had the presence of mind to put my hand around my wrist to try and stop the bleeding. And I walked to the front of the shop, and the son of the owner of the company ran over. He saw what was happening, put a towel. I guess he instructed somebody to go back and get my fingers. I went they put me in the company van to drive me to the hospital, and all I remember was I was looking out the window, and then I looked over on the dash, and I saw what appeared to be a glove, and with anyway my mangled fingers. And I'm sorry for being descriptive, but people have injuries, and injuries can cause pain and not just physically but psychologically. It can impact people in many different ways. So it's important for me to describe this to you, because I very rarely talk about it, and I'm sure a lot of you have asked how I was injured in the past, or you wanted to know, right? You were curious. But anyway, so I looked at the driver, who was the owner's son, and I said, "Are those my fingers?" And he goes, "Yeah." He goes like this, right? And so I remember clearly that day. This was February 20th, 1986. I'll never forget that date. And then I looked over, and then I looked out the window, and I thought, "Holy fuck, what just happened?" Like my whole life just changed. It just changed right now, right? Those were my thoughts. And the very first person to visit me at the hospital the very next day was the owner's son, and telling me about, when we did, provide you. I'm sorry that has happened to you, but we provided you with some training, and accidents happen, and I just want you to make sure that we really care. And you'll probably get interviewed by some people about what happened. And I just, I wanted to just remind you that, yeah, we gave you some training, and unfortunately these things happen. All right. And I'm sitting on the bed, and I'm looking at this guy, right? You got to think about this. I'm an 18-year-old punk, right? And I'm looking at this guy, and I'm thinking, what the fuck are you even doing here? Why are you here? You're the last fucking person I want to see, right? It took years, many years, for me to get over that. Fortunately, I'm a very strong person. I have mentally, and I have a good foundation. And I believe in the Lord, who guides me and gives me strength for everything I do. And I think that those two things help me through it. But the Ministry of Labor did an investigation, and guess what? Those machines are supposed to have guards to make sure that your hands are nowhere near that die in the event that it comes down unexpectedly, right? Causing you damage. And the guards were sitting in behind the punch press, leaning against the wall, full of dust. Nobody told me about any guards. And then I learned that that machine had been shut down by the Ministry of Labor previously for the same infraction, by not having those guards. So that employer didn't learn, obviously, the first time that they were fined, but I'm the one who got fucked. Is that negligence on the part of the employer? Of course it is. And they were fined by the Ministry of Labor. So in this circumstance, and with the WSIB as an employer, are they responsible for ensuring that the law is applied in a consistent manner within the specific sections of the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act, and that the policies are being adhered to by decision makers? And if that doesn't happen, and something happens to you, for example, or someone in your family, or someone that you know, a friend, who ends up committing suicide because of the negligence of the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board as an employer for not having ensured that their staff are trained sufficiently, have the experience, and have the support from others, the guidance by managers and directors and all the way up the ladder, to ensure that they're making decisions that are consistent with the law and with their policies. And if that doesn't happen, can they be held responsible as an employer? We'll see. The WSIB, in my opinion, and I touched on this in my previous video, based on what I've seen, is engaging in a systemic process or a strategy to remove the involvement of psychologists, mental health professionals in providing opinions concerning the treatment, the type of treatment, the frequency of treatment, and providing opinions in terms of whether or not someone suffering from mental health issues is ready to return to work, any kind of work, modified or otherwise, or even engage in return to work activities with their return to work people whose primary concern is to get them back to work and not to help them make sure they get the treatment that they need to get them ready to go back to work, right? Because the priorities are very clear for me based on what I've seen, right? So, yes, because what I've heard from professionals is that, well, we don't like you because you guys, you're just so quick to say that, no, they're not ready to return to work. And, we think that if they can walk out the door to go somewhere, they should be able to go to work, right? It's just the kind of stupid fucking nonsense that doesn't make sense in any person's brain. Any person who has the ability to have rational thought and apply logic and common sense, right? That even 12, 13, 14-year-olds can, right? But they don't. But this is what I've seen, right? The WSIB as a whole, as an organization, not just one case manager or manager or director for a particular sector or office. No. I've seen this organization wide, as far fucking wide as they go, and as far fucking to the top as they go. I've seen all of it at every level, right? This is why I'm convinced this is a strategy. It is a systemic process that they've engaged in to eliminate crucial providers in mental health from that process. Because we got to get you back to work, right? Otherwise, it's going to cost us too much money. And you got to get back to work at whatever cost. But here's what the law states. And you've heard me say this before. Section 33 of the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act, right? It states that a worker who sustains an injury is entitled to health care as necessary and appropriate for their recovery. But the WSIB decides that they need to make these decisions for you or for your healthcare because your healthcare providers aren't sufficiently equipped and trained and lack the appropriate expertise to make these decisions. Nurse fucking consultants are the ones that should make these decisions because that's who they have making these decisions, right? Oftentimes to overrule your own doctors. Nurse consultants. It's horseshit, but that's what's happening, right? So what do? They get your psychologist or your therapist or your psychiatrist, whoever's providing mental health treatment, when they're requesting additional treatment, additional blocks of treatment, this is part of their little system, right? Their strategy. They make them jump through hoops, right? Right? They get endless fucking shit that they ask them to do, right? To the point where sometimes doctors and psychologists, everybody says, fuck, I don't have the time to deal with this shit, man. Really? All of this paperwork? Endless paperwork? And they get frustrated. Of course they do. And I mean, anybody else would. Right? You go to the mechanic because your engine isn't working, whatever, something's wrong. And the mechanic, the guy who's actually licensed as a mechanic, he takes a look at the car. And, yeah, we think that your belt for your coolant, I don't know shit about cars, but it's not working. We need to replace it. Okay? So someone who's learning to become a mechanic in the same right shop comes up to you and says, "Yeah, I don't think that's right. I think the mechanic was wrong." Right? And then he says, "Well, listen, why don't you ask the mechanic to state, like in writing, very, very descriptively, all of the things that the reasons why he thinks you need this fucking belt, right? This is the learner or apprentice or whatever, who's not a mechanic. Does that seem fucking reasonable to you? Right? Who are you going to trust? The punk who isn't a mechanic, who isn't licensed as a mechanic, and who knows, maybe he's in the first year apprentice or whatever. Or are you going to listen to the mechanic? I'm gonna give you a real recent, very recent example. And see, I'm in a good vantage point because I get to see all of this stuff from all case managers and directors and all of these inconsistencies. I have a bird's eye view of this fucking cesspool, right? But let me give you an example, right? This is an interaction between a nurse consultant who's not a doctor or a trained psychologist and a psychologist who's treating an injured worker, right? So the psychologist who's been treating this person for a few years writes to the WSIB in the letter dated February 24th, 2025. And this is what he writes down. I'm not going to write everything, but the main points, right? I'll put it up here because if I don't, you're not going to believe me. Quote, "I recommend an additional 3 months of regular psychological treatment sessions." And he provides, right? He details in that letter the reasons for requesting that, right? This is a psychologist. This is February 24th. Okay, so the nurse consultant writes back to the psychologist, right? And the relevant parts of this letter, because it's a fucking joke, right? This is what the nurse consultant states in the letter. "Treatment requested after MMR, that stands for maximum medical recovery, is reached, in brackets, and in the absence of significant deterioration, close bracket, is referred to as, quote, maintenance treatment, end quote. Treatment requests for post-MMR, so after you've reached maximum medical recovery, according to probably the same nurse consultant or decision made by this person, where a permanent impairment is evident and there is no evidence of a significant worsening, is generally referred to as, again, quote, maintenance treatment, end quote. And then the nurse case manager has the audacity to request additional information from the psychologist, who had already written on the 24th of February that his patient needed more treatment. So this is, again, the doctor writing on February 28th. So 4 days after he wrote his initial request for treatment. This is what the psychologist stated. "Further to my report dated February 24th, 2025, requesting additional treatment or treatment extension." And then he goes on to explain why the extension was being necessary, what the treatment plan was, how many times he had to go take a crap. And then the case manager or the nurse consultant, in her infinite wisdom, agreed that, yes, we're going to provide you with, or your patient, with additional treatment, right? We're going to authorize it. You can't make this shit up. Like, what the fuck? Like, where does this shit happen in the real world? Okay, my friends. So here's the thing. Do you know how many times the term maintenance treatment, right, that the nurse consultant referenced in her letter to the psychologist? Twice, right? Do you know how many times that term is mentioned in the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act, the law? 0. Not one single fucking time. 0. Okay? In fact, it's not even a policy, right? It's not a policy. It's what the WSIB refers to an administrative practice document. We don't have a policy for this because it doesn't appear anywhere in the act. So because we don't have a policy, we'll just make up some shit. Because we got to have something there. Otherwise, we would be asking for something that's just totally fucking asinine, right? So this is what this administrative document states. I'm going to put it up here. Note, right at the front, this is not a policy. It is a supplementary document to illustrate how the WSIB will administer the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act, 1997, and policies 170102, entitlement to health care, and 170103, choice and change of healthcare professional in practice. Now, listen to this. If there's a conflict between this administrative practice document and the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act or a WSIB policy, the decision maker will rely on the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act or WSIB policy as the case may be. The practice and approach is applicable to musculoskeletal injuries, not psychological or mental stress injuries. Why? Okay, if it requires explaining, right? Because it should be abundantly clear to them. I'm not going to comment on this because there is no ambiguity. You know this. I know that you understand what I just read, but it's for the sake of these fuckers, right, who insist on putting psychologists and other doctors to the hoop to pay you to provide services that the law is required to provide. And doctors are mentioned 34 times in the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act. They're essential to providing opinions for treatment and restrictions and all of these things, right? But these fucking idiots cannot seem to understand things that are clearly stated in their administrative practice documents or whatever. It states that if it is in conflict with the law, the maintenance treatment, which is not referenced in the law whatsoever, then you have to defer to the law, which is section 33, right? Because doctors should be the ones making the determination as to how much treatment you need, what type of treatment you need, when you've reached a maximum medical recovery, if you're going to get better, if you're not going to get better, right? Are you able to go to work? Do you have all of these things, right? I've talked about them ad nauseum. I really have. But for these idiots, right? If you're listening, right? Okay? Because I know you are. You fucking idiots. If you're listening, read your own shit. If there isn't a policy, which there isn't, if it's not, if maintenance treatment isn't clearly defined in the law, you gotta forget what you're thinking you should do, because nobody gives a fuck what you're thinking about, right? Everybody wants to make sure the law is applied correctly. Your own thoughts about whether you think it's just or fair or necessary or what, fuck off. Nobody gives a fuck about any of that shit, right? Yes, this is for the nurse consultants and this is for the case managers and all of the idiots above them who decide that they want to refuse to apply the fucking law that they've been charged with and responsible for applying in a consistent manner, right? You can't replace the law with your own fucking opinions, you idiots. You can't do that. Stop making people go through fucking hoops to get the treatment that they need, you motherfuckers. Because if you're in those shoes, if you're in their shoes and you have to live through the stress and the anguish that mental health makes you go through, because it's not a choice. Nobody wants it. Right? But if you have to live through that, you wouldn't be dismissive of the recommendations of psychologists and therapists and those who have the expertise to treat these people. If you're in their shoes, you would jump off a fucking cliff to make sure you got that treatment if you needed it. But you know what? You don't have to live through that. Because even if you were in their shoes, you wouldn't have to live through it. You know why? I'll tell you why. Right? Because Jeff Lang, your president, and this is a direct quote from Jeff Lang, your president. He said, I just put a video out to our entire organization today because it's about Let's Talk Day. And it was an announcement that at the WSIB, for our staff, they now have unlimited mental health benefits as part of their employee benefits plan. Right? Thank you, Jeff. But what the fuck are you going to do for those people who are right now in distress, emotional distress? A lot of which is caused by your own fucking people, right? What are you going to do for them? How does that video you put out to your organization apply to them? You can apply and provide unlimited health treatment for mental health issues for all of your staff out of the funds that employers have contributed mandatory to ensure that injured workers and their families are provided with that level of service. But you can take the money from there for your own staff, and everybody else can go fuck themselves. And that, my friends, is the face of evil. Because mental health doesn't only affect the worker, it affects the family, the spouse, the children who have to watch them go through horrible pain, who watch them withdraw from the things they used to enjoy doing, the things that gave them joy, the things that they used to do with you as a child or as a spouse. Jeff Lang, you better start doing better, man. I have you squarely in my fucking sights. And this isn't going to stop. Not by a long shot. So, my friends, a lot more is coming on this topic, as I'm sure you know. You don't want to miss it. Because there are strategies for holding these fuckers accountable for ignoring your doctors and ignoring you and putting you in a situation that you should never be put in. All right, my friends. So for those of you who aren't subscribers, I welcome you to subscribe. I'm at 816 and I really want to get to 1,000. And my main goal is to let everybody across this entire province know that we can help, that they have help to deal with these people, to deal with these monsters, to deal with the face of evil. We can help. All right? I don't know if I'll be putting out another video between now and Christmas, but if I don't, I want to wish you and your family a very blessed Christmas. And may the Lord provide you with abundance of health, joy, and peace.
We know that connecting with the right lawyer or paralegal to handle your case can be overwhelming. Do they have the expertise to handle your case? Do they have a good track record? Are they affordable? We've got you covered. Legal Pro Connect takes the guesswork out of finding the right legal provider. We've already done the vetting for you and connect you with the right lawyer or paralegal. With the expertise to handle your specific issue and at preferred rates. Get connected today. Visit www.wsibsettlements.com.